welcome to Audiovisual Cultures, the podcast that explores areas of the arts and cultural production. I'm Paula Blair, and this is the first episode recorded while social distancing amid the COVID-19 novel coronavirus outbreak. Today it's Thursday, the 19th of March 2020, and this week the UK has gone from business as usual on Monday to school closures and impending lockdown from Friday. It's a worrying time, full of uncertainty and heartbreak as so many lose the battle and other battles of all kinds arise for people as we change how we move and interact in the world. Well, some of us, others are carrying on as normal, and that's what scares me the most. If you're hearing this at the appropriate time and not off in the distant future when this is hopefully all over, actually some of these might be useful anyway, please practice thorough and regular hand washing, including drying your hands well, sneeze and cough into a tissue or your sleeved elbow to keep your hands clean, avoid touching your face, be considerate of others by keeping your distance and by being patient and just generally being kind. As Bill and Ted say, be excellent to each other. A lot of folk are scared, so check in with people. If you're able, try to stay somewhere safe, away from others, and mind yourself. Look for advice for how to keep calm and reach out if you want to chat. Email anytime at audiovisualcultures@gmail.com if you'd like to arrange a cuppa over Skype or something like that. If anyone's interested in being involved in remote chats for the podcast, in addition to that, I'd love to hear from you. The alternative is going to be me rambling about esoteric things that I'm interested in, or Sheil and I having nerd-offs. So do yourselves a service and get involved with the podcast. Thanks so much to our members on patreon.com/avcultures for all your support. Times ahead are uncertain, and I don't want you to feel obliged to carry on your payments if things get tight for you. This is not important, but staying alive and keeping your families well is. What we can all do is put the pressure on the government to demand a universal basic income and support for creatives and freelancers. I'm very lucky for now to have a partner who is as secure as anybody can be, and I'm going to keep producing my wee show for as long as I'm able. I'd love for you to be a part of that by sending recordings, having chats with me that you're happy to record about stuff, having discussions maybe after synchronised film viewings. I'm hopefully going to set one of those up soon. Messing about on social media, just all of it, anything, any ideas are welcome for how we can create some positivity amid all of this. Culture may and probably will have to radically change, and I can't shake the feeling that life, society, the world will never be the same after this virus. So let's, in a celebratory way, capture the great things, the important things, the joyous things, the silly things, the things that make us happiest about culture, and let's take them with us into what could be a brave new world. And this could be a bit of a documentation of some of that. With the notion of aftermaths and the passage of time, I wanted to read you an essay I wrote last year for a publication on the performance artist Alastair MacLennan. The book was due to come out later this year, but with everything up in the air and much more urgent things for all of us to deal with, who knows what's going to happen with that. So I'm going to read you my final draft of the essay, and then it might at least have a bit of life. So this is Precarious Aftermaths by Paula Blair. Stalker, 1979, the Russian science fiction drama directed by Andrei Tarkovsky and adapted from Arkady and Boris Strugatsky's novel Roadside Picnic, 1972, is a film Alastair MacLennan holds in high regard. For the most part, both texts involve slow, precarious stepping through a shifting, autonomous landscape, made dangerous in the wake of an extraterrestrial visitation. From this abstracted account of the film and knowledge of MacLennan's approaches to and the themes emanating from his actuations, it is no wonder the artist is drawn to the images and philosophies central to Stalker. It is a film in which pausing and stillness facilitate movement and progression. Detachment leads to empathy. Precision collaborates with chance, and constricted framings enable deeper and wider perception. It explores states of aftermath and their inherent flux. These relations and codependencies also emerge in and are examined by MacLennan's work. As the visitors to the zone in Stalker must negotiate with the traces, artefacts, and sketchy memories of past actions and presences, in this essay I examined still and moving image documentation, installations of performance artefacts, and memories of my acts of witness, of work included in or connected to MacLennan's 2017 Lair retrospective in Edinburgh's Summer Hall. Through analysis of the ways of seeing, ways of feeling, the blurred ambivalences, and the precarities emerging in examples of MacLennan's more recent actuations and exhibitions, I identify approaches to understanding states of being and the notion of aftermath present in his work. In previous writing about MacLennan, I described his gallery installations as non-performative, Blair 2014, page 147, when in fact they are registers or aftermaths of performative actions. Lair comprised drawings, collages, videos, photographs, stone piles, a long raised mound of earth crossed with a charred length of wood, and performance artefacts such as eyeglasses, plastic security tapes, and branches tied with fine ribbons. These are all visible traces or remains of past ephemeral activities. Performance acts took place to obtain and arrange the soil on its resting place, the spectacles in their heap and the stones in their piles. They signify the absent presence of whoever placed them, remaining as markers of that which is not seen and is no longer there. These objects evoke memories of MacLennan's past work. For example, the raised mound of earth recalls body of (D) earth. MacLennan's contribution to the 1997 Venice Biennale representing Ireland, which drew attention to the individuals killed up to that point in the Northern Ireland conflict since 1969. The deadwood, as a remnant of a once living entity, stands in for the body, the trace of what was once a person, while earth enables dead matter to give life again. Balanced precisely but precariously across the plinth, the deadwood coexists with the earth mound. Their moment of aftermath is a slow stage of flux, the ground settling after a burial, or the metaphorical dust settling after a confrontation, before eventual renewal and growth. Accordingly, in the Summer Hall TV Arts News promotional video for Lair, MacLennan states, and I quote, "The themes are related to aspects of living that as an older person I'm aware of. I can see it in everyday life. They're based on the notion of energies transitioning, that everything in fixed form alters over a period of time in interrelation with other elements, and also it's very much linked to how the various elements interfuse in actuality, earth, air, fire, water and so on. You can see the intertransitions, the alterations of the formal relations in relationship." End quote. These notions of fusing and transitioning elements are often indicated by the titles of MacLennan's work, which tend to involve wordplay, rhyme, repetition, homonyms, and assonance. The similarity of Lair to the name Alastair reflects that the exhibition and solo performance of the same title amalgamate the many concerns emerging from the artist's decades-long practice. The weightiness of such a retrospective is lightened, but by no means reduced, if we consider the similarity of saying Lair to a toddler trying to say Alastair, reminding us to always inquire, notice and experiment as actively and openly as humans in early development do. The words Lair in combination also evoke juxtapositions of safety and danger, freedom and ensnarement, outside and inside. The work is a meeting place, a site of encounter where opposing or opposite places, elements, states of being, ways of seeing and ways of feeling are facilitated in working together instead of clashing. The dissolving of tensions can be explained by MacLennan's engagement in Zen practices. In conversation with Susan Mansfield for The Scotsman ahead of the exhibition opening, MacLennan states that overcoming binary, oppositional thinking was fostered by living through Zen, where the subject and object must become fluid. This was when MacLennan lived in Canada in the late 1960s, where more natural for an artist who has overcome conflictual binarism to then find himself than Belfast in the throes of internecine conflict in the mid-1970s, and where more appropriate appropriate for him to remain, as Northern Ireland in 2019 finds itself amid a political tug-of-war dubbed Brexit, a term that excludes and negates the region, while the actions it references prevent the aftermath of violence from settling. This uncertain conflict post-conflict betweenness of being was reflected in Lair. An example is Blackout from 1983, a sculptural series of collages within glass frames displayed in a row on a wooden structure, the details of which can largely only be discerned from diagonal viewpoints. On entering the room housing it in Summerhall, visitors were faced with blackened sheets inside the frames. Writing in white chalk on each reads Blackout in capital letters, the name of a newspaper, either the Irish News or Belfast Newsletter, followed by a date, Monday 13th June 1983. Each panel is numbered in sequence in the bottom right corner. What look like white envelopes are positioned pointing diagonally upwards from the bottom left corners. These each have two unevenly placed stamps and handwritten text on them, which, when read, starting from the entrance and moving to the back of the room, formed a short poem apparently addressed to someone called Shona. Looking at the pieces from the other side reveals newspaper sports pages with messy black paint splodges marking the action that produced the full coverage over leaf. Each is signed and dated by MacLennan, creating a dual effect of de- and re-authoring and re-archiving the sheets. In making the visitor perform a phased mode of viewing, this reveal of the back pages indicates that the onus is on us when seeing what is clearly visible, to question what is not there and what we are prevented from seeing. In this instance, it is the news pages representing and reporting the sides of the Northern Ireland conflict. The newsletter is associated with Protestant Unionist Loyalist sympathies, while the Irish News is more Catholic Nationalist Republican. That the play Wars of Men's Sport remained visible while other news is blacked out was meaningful and urgent in the 1980s, but takes on new resonance when displayed in Britain in 2017 as the United Kingdom prepares, or fails to prepare, to leave the European Union without considering the consequences for the precarious peace in Northern Ireland, in part due to a legacy of reductive, biased, minimal and often non-existent national reportage of the socio-political conflict as it raged in a place apart. The erratic and frantic nature of irreversible conflictual harm, although slowed down, extends to the relative stillness of official peacetime. Film theorist Laura Mulvey identifies examples of two kinds of time coexisting in films such as Man with a Movie Camera, directed by Dziga Vertov and released in 1929. Specifically, the sequence in which the film freezes shows shots of film strips and then the film's editor, Elizaveta Svilova, cutting, splicing and playing sequences from the film, revealing the process of making it. Mulvey points out that these are at once moving and arrested images, possessing both action and inaction. This understanding of dual time helps convey the state of being in post-agreement 1998 Northern Ireland, moving forwards while staying still. Like the functions of cinema, live performance and its documentation, and remnant artefacts, mark what Mulvey, building from C.S. Pearce's semiotic theory of the index, recognises as a thing's thenness and nowness. She states, quote, "The index has a privileged relation to time, to the moment and duration of its inscription. It also has a physical relation to the original of which it is the sign," end quote. Like the conflict, the ephemeral live performance has passed, but indexical signs that show that it happened remain and become time-based objects, holding both their own presentness and the pastness of the original they signify. This state of past presentness can be related to changes at the levels of chemistry and physics as explored in Alchemist from 2010, a collaborative experiment in performance to camera with Sandra Johnson included in their retrospective. It was filmed in Fencipa Hill on the border between Scotland and England by Richard Ash Rowan, a moving image artist concerned with alchemal transformations and dissolving boundaries between what is real and not real. In Alchemist, MacLennan and Johnson engage in performative alchemy, or test to investigate the border landscape's transformative potential. Taken in metaphorical and metaphysical senses, this is not unlike the zone's potential for transformation in Stalker. Alchemist raises questions around actual perceivable and imagined transformations and the relationships connecting apparently separate occurrences. One sequence involves a close-up of 3 pairs of hands, the third belonging to Bridie Ash Rowan, teasing out a clump of raw wool in an anti-clockwise motion shown in dissolves between fast and slow motion shots until a circular string remains. This crossfades into a close-up of eddying water in a stream, also pulling and swirling in an anti-clockwise motion, the edit overlapping the physics of the natural world and the changes effected by human interaction with natural resources, and both simultaneously sped up and slowed down in moments of pastness, made present and synchronous by the film. This performing with and in nature within reach of the liminal space of a geopolitical border raises questions around the space and time of performance art, particularly when in the case of Alchemist, the liveness of the work was recorded and deliberately distorted by the film's production and screening. The indexicality of any primarily visual medium manifests through acts of witness. The actuations in Alchemist were witnessed only by Ash Rowan and his recording equipment and took place in remote, albeit open, areas. In a similar way to the excursion to the zone in Stalker, the area is cordoned off by invisible barriers. Access is possible but difficult and minimal, like the uninhabited wooded borderlands, which exhibit the absent presence of human interaction in unoccupied structures, shelters and apparatus. The film shows the artist's processes that leave traces via acts that embody the tension between stillness and movement. As with many of MacLennan's collaborative actions with Johnson, Alchemist sees their contact at once mediated and facilitated by found objects balanced between them. For example, a sinewy twig held between their foreheads with its middle set alight. The chemical reaction of fire and heat combusting the detritus of once living and now dead matter creates fertile ash that will help keep other living organic matter alive. The fire also brings precarity, risk and contingency. Held between the artists, MacLennan with eyes closed and Johnson with eyes open and watching the flame, and possibly MacLennan through the flame, evokes and enacts different ways of seeing and feeling. There is internal looking in this moment as well as outward watching, both reframed against a window onto the trees beyond, which are backlit by twilight. Physically and metaphysically, the artists and their actions are inside and out. They are between states of being. Their touching without touching includes hands raised near the flames, almost but never quite harnessing the fire. The immediate framing, light from the flames, and their reframing against the window sees the artists trouble and test the boundaries between inner and outer, life and death, nature and civilization, pastness and presentness, separation and connection, light and darkness, and vision and feeling. The closeness of the framing and the limited fading light determines what can be seen, and so draws attention to what cannot. Perhaps while looking internally as their bodies become both the object and the subject of the action and image, they unlock some understanding of the interconnectivity of all things. The fire flaring then fizzling out to its final embers marks time's passing and signals irreversible chemical change. The twig, at once a bridge and a division between Johnson and MacLennan, changes and yet performs the same function throughout the shot. The woodland border arrests them while itself being in flux, the visual record of which remains to be seen and seen again. To consider acts of witness and ways of seeing in conjunction with aftermaths, the mound of spectacles in the exhibition entitled Lies in Wait, once used for corrective vision, are now viewed as waste and detritus. Reminiscent of piles of belongings taken from Holocaust victims, the heaps bear sinister connotations of the worst kind of discarding, still reverberating through time in a mass experience of shared traumatic post-memory. Individually though, when worn by the appropriate wearer, the spectacles enabled improved improved ability to see. Glasses also reframe the wearer's field of vision, often creating a frame within the limits of peripheral vision. They transform how the wearer sees and can interact with the world, but the glasses in MacLennan's work no longer serve that function. In their thenness, they mark their owners' personalities and external looks, whereas in their nowness, they are performance art artifacts that represent mass human absent presences, as well as dual ways of seeing not seeing, and dual temporal realities. During his Alastair solo performance, MacLennan tipped a bucket of spectacles over his head. He was awash with multiple, different and no longer used in that way, frames of vision, marking many absences and lost viewpoints in the process. In the Alastair solo actuation, the prevalent theme of absent presence combined with acts of repetition and ambivalences between stillness, movement and precision chance in ways that invite questions concerning the time of process, transformation and aftermath. Alastair bore similarities to other recent live work by MacLennan, for instance Side Side, performed in Baltic 39, Newcastle upon Tyne, as part of the drafting 2-day series of performance events, and Feed a Heat, performed during Arctic Action in Svalbard, both in 2015. Each involved mark making with black ink on water-soaked white paper, and walkthroughs made precarious by difficult terrain, and MacLennan balancing large pieces of deadwood on his head while carrying a glass full of water. Intended as an outdoor performance, the constriction imposed by the small basement room in Summerhall to which MacLennan was moved added further to the tension of witnessing this. The floor was coated with plastic sheeting, and the paper laid in a strip in the middle of the floor was flanked by galvanised buckets containing water and spectacles or ash, clear jugs full of water, and tubs holding black ink. There were 4 small desks staggered on either side of the long line of paper. 2 of them in diagonally opposite corners were equipped with a jug of water, a sponge, 2 ink pots with pens, and pebbles holding down 2 sheets of white paper. Of the 2 other tables, one was empty, and on the other sat a large tumbler filled to the brim with water, and 2 large branches bound together and strung with ribbons. MacLennan began by removing his shoes and tipping the contents of one of the 2 buckets over his head, soaking him and the floor with water, and scattering many pairs of spectacles. He carefully stepped around these to reach the first work table, where he poured water over the 2 sheets of paper and then spread it evenly with the sponge, a feature of many of his performances that symbolise and facilitate dual internal and external vision. MacLennan removed from his pocket a pair of glasses with the left lens blackened and fine ribbons tied to the empty frame. He unravelled the attached ribbons and put them on. With a pen in each hand, he made corresponding lines and shapes on the separate sheets. The inky water flowed and pooled as the scratching of the pens was amplified by the silence in the room. The ribbons hanging from the spectacle frames fell into the liquids and added to the marking process almost like tendrils as MacLennan worked over the table, their marks like MacLennan's being gradually dispersed by the water. Stepping carefully to the centre of the space, he poured water on the long strip on the floor and with his fingers dribbled ink liberally into the pooling, spreading water, repeating this at each end of the strip and wherever there were gaps. There the liquids created their own chance markings, existing between states of drying and wetness, their internal movements barely perceptible in the room's perimeter, populated by viewers. The plastic sheeting both protected the floor and maintained the wetness of the materials as they dried, prolonging their states of transitioning and settling. Each move between parts of the room necessitated slow, careful stepping so as not to knock something over, slip or disrupt the elements as they mixed and transformed in their own time. The traces of MacLennan's inked hands gathered on the jug handles and pots. He stepped through, all the while repeating the flowing hand movements with his left non-dominant hand as if drawing in mid-air. The effect added to the synergy of the various elements working together, always moving and flowing even when appearing to lie still, as with all things in chemistry. The hubbub of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe going on above served as a reminder that stillness is only ever relative and merely describes a lack of perceivable movement. When finished with the ink, MacLennan wiped his hands and picked up a black knapsack positioned near the door. From it he sprinkled shredded paper over the water ink-soaked sheets on the floor. This was new to this series of connected actuations, but not from MacLennan. The last time I witnessed him do this was during his collaborative AAA performance with Adrian Hall and Andre Stitt in Catalyst Arts Belfast in 2013. When using shredded paper many times before, it had been imprinted with text, sometimes stating the names of the official dead of the Northern Ireland conflict. Spreading the shreds, MacLennan stepped through the collected materials. He placed one last shred on the surface of the water, filling the tumbler, sitting on the table next to the branches. With some difficulty, he balanced the branches on his head and picked up the tumbler. Upon realising he would walk through again, some viewers slipped down to the floor. So narrow was the space for materials intended for an outdoor event. This arrangement and walk were challenging and not helped by sudden bangs coming from elsewhere in the building, the sonic environment of the festival encroaching on these quiet acts. Slowly and calmly setting off, MacLennan performed the last walkthrough, and like the stalkers, the one with the most risk. The ribbons tied from the branches reached down to the floor, linking the deadwood with the paper, ink, water, spectacles and stones below, and sometimes the feet of viewers lining the space. Stopping and turning slowly, MacLennan placed a glass of water on the empty table. After also removing and replacing the branches beside it, he slowly moved to the adjacent table and repeated the water drawing ink marking actions. All the while, the increasing thudding and festival din seeped into the sonic space of the comparatively quiet, still and contemplative room. However, I could still hear the scratching of the pens sliding across the soaked pages, the two types of sound in competing events as immiscible as the ink and water. Like the ink and water occupying the same space and time, or the visitation's effects on the landscape in Stalker, in their coexistence they changed one another while remaining the same. MacLennan then moved towards the second bucket, removed and folded his glasses, wound the ribbons back round them and replaced them in his pocket. He then tipped the bucket over his head, its contents of ash spilling over him and hanging in the air. Through the dust cloud he gently crept to the door, placed the empty bucket down and slipped away out of the room. Like the actuation titles, the repeated actions in Air exhibited an asymmetrical symmetry, in largely but not quite ending as it began. As with Stalker, while actions are repeated and mirrored, the journey and its outcome are never the same, but instead contingent on the surrounding environment, which bears risks and challenges. You can never return by the same path via which you arrived, because things will have changed. When times of transition end is unclear, if we consider the being of all things at atomic levels of chemistry and physics, stasis, stillness and arrest are merely aspects of human perception. When changes occur with geological slowness, they are nonetheless occurring. Even when we think the performance is over and the artwork is complete, its elements imperceptibly remain in the process of transitioning, transforming, mixing and settling, reflecting the potential of fluid ways of being and living. Like the notion of dual temporality, that the liquids are insoluble but occupy the same space, and that they take time to settle and dry in an environment in which creation was facilitated by destruction, is indicative of the tensions of coexistence in the aftermath of violence. From this way of thinking, we can understand aftermath as an ongoing process of actual perceived and imagined transformation. To consider the time of Air aftermath as beginning from the moment MacLennan removed himself. While the physical materials are no longer in the room, video documentation online means something live and ephemeral now exists as a replayable, pausable, archival object possessing thenness and nowness. Conflicts with names like the Troubles that denote a set of events occurring within an identified duration and place must similarly be archived, replayed and paused in their aftermath to better understand them. The irony of progression is that we must look back to enable moving forward. It must embrace flux. A region transitioning from conflict carries its trauma throughout changes, just as the paper holds the immiscible water-ink mixture coated in ash and shredded paper. Bearing in mind that paper is not as effective a vessel for liquids as tumblers and jugs, there will be spillages, seepages, erosions and concentrated pools. Shifts will continue as physics and chemistry take over in the absence of former presences. With some facilitation, opposing elements might harmonise if they accept states of flux, and even if they do not, movement and change are inevitable. With thanks for research on this essay to Alastair MacLennan, Sandra Johnson, Sherry Driver, Joanna Leach, Richard Ash Rowan, Jordan Hutchins and Andrew Shale. For references, check on our social media as I'll be putting out links to everything there. Listening to Audiovisual Cultures with me, Paula Blair, self-indulgently reading my own essays because I can't get out and about at the minute to record stuff with people. Yay! And the music is Common Ground by Airtone, licensed under Creative Commons Non-Commercial 3.0 Attribution and can be downloaded from ccmixter.org. Be part of the conversation by finding us on socials. We are AV Cultures Pod on Instagram and we're AV Cultures on Twitter and Facebook, and it's there where I'll be posting a lot of the links to the other texts and performances and so on that I have referenced. As I say, get in touch. There's going to be a new normal from now on, so get in touch. I am happy to just speak to people. If anybody out there is feeling a wee bit lonely and you just want a bit of a chat about stuff, you can get in touch and that can be kept very private. And to reiterate, please be part of making this podcast. I really would love this to be a sort of virtual community effort. Now, I always envisioned that for this podcast, but now is the time to do it. So if you're out there and you're hearing this and you've ever thought about just giving it a go, give it a go on mine and see how you think of it. I'm going to keep doing this for as long as I can, whatever happens, okay? Thanks for listening. Please keep well and please keep tuning in and please be part of the community. Take care.